Okay, thank you all very much for joining us. I'm here with Nth Bar-Fields. Nth is the CEO and co-founder of Empyrean Trust. He originally worked in the nonprofit management sector. There, he helped charitable organizations realize their missions while remaining solvent, usually a good thing.
Yeah.
Uh, Seeing the challenges that nonprofits as a whole were going to face in the future, he began creating strategies to transform nonprofits into for-profit social enterprises. Really like to kind of dig into that a little bit. The skills he acquired lent themselves to startups with noble visions, such as the kind of clients that Empyrean Trust works with. So aside from his work as a grant manager and data analyst for several organizations, he's also worked as a nuclear engineering tech for the US Navy and was a team leader for the Idea Connection think tank. As a grant writer, he secured well over $3 million for the clients he partnered with to develop their programs. The people in his grant writing firm have won over 20 million for various companies as well. So, Nth, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So, yeah, you have a very varied background, right? How did your career bring you to this point?
so I've always been interested in helping people, and my family was very interested in money. So at the time, they were of the mind that you should be an engineer. That's what makes money. So that's what my background is. It's
Yeah.
chemical and nuclear engineering.
Okay.
But that did not fulfill my need and my inner desire. So I started applying that type of thinking to the nonprofit sector
Okay.
to uh, help visions become reality. And from there, I stumbled upon grant writing, and it turned out I was pretty good at it. And so from there on, it just became my niche.
So when you were, you kind of relate that back to trying to get visions into a reality,
Mhm.
make visions reality. Why is that so hard for people to do on their own, especially in the nonprofit world?
So the nonprofit world is made primarily of people who want to do good for the world, which is phenomenal and
Yeah.
admirable. They tend to forget about making money,
Yeah.
and they tend to forget that these programs actually require funding. Um, so typically, if your mission is entirely dependent upon donations or something like that,
Sure.
you're probably going to go under. And it's very fickle from year to year whether or not you're going to actually even exist. So you typically only want maybe at best maybe 25% of your mission to be to 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 be that way. You largely want to start creating some type of product or service that generates revenue, or preferably both. And that's what I started working on developing for a lot of the nonprofits. So I'd get them a grant, and grants are cool and all, but they may make up 1/5 of your budget.
Yeah.
But as time progressed, they won't even need those grants because they'll be making enough money themselves
Right.
to
So,
just
so
run
the
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 operation.
idea is trying to get people thinking a little bit more about the money, but also just broadening their thought process into a little bit more than just either donation based or grant based to make them a little bit more sustainable.
Absolutely, yeah. It's just the future, and there's there seems to be a lot of a lot of nonprofits created every year, and they usually have redundant missions with a few thousand other nonprofits that already exist. So you're competing for the same dollars.
Sure.
So
Sure.
you typically you need a self-sustaining model, and you need to also tweak your whole mission and operation to touch upon some type of service or need that the other entities out there aren't really fulfilling.
And you're talking about this is kind of only if you want your organization to survive. I feel like someone might be listening to this and be like, well, yeah, but that's not my mission. My mission is to do this good, and
Sure, yeah,
people should be donating to because they want to see that, and
they
that's great.
absolutely should.
They
Yeah.
absolutely should, but they don't.
Yeah, exactly, but they don't. So
Yeah.
at some point, and that's just it. Like a lot of CEOs of nonprofits, they're more CVOs, chief visionary officers.
Okay.
They have a strong vision, and
Yeah.
that's admirable. You need someone with that strong vision to keep everybody on the right page, and they keep keep everything ethical and everything like that, but you still need to take care of the nuts and bolts. And that's where you do need some type of realistic execution. And you can find a way to marry both together so that you still keep your mission, but matter of fact, not only do you keep your mission, you can probably expand it and reach a higher volume of people. And you can also stay afloat. So yeah.
So and in your bio, you talk about trying to help organizations transform into a kind of social enterprise. What does that actually mean? If someone's listening to this, first off, difference between a nonprofit and a social enterprise, but also why should you be thinking more broadly about how to make impact other than just, I'm going to create a charity?
Sure. Yeah. So at least in the United States, it does vary from country to country a little bit. Nonprofits, as the name implies, they can make a revenue, but they're not allowed to make a profit. They are chiefly concerned about some type of charitable cause. And that's all well and good. We need those. Now, there are some companies that have a double bottom line. They're looking for, they are definitely looking for some type of, some social reward, something that helps the community or some aspect of humanity, but they're also looking for a profit. They tend to last longer than, and they tend to be able to do more than nonprofits. Out here in the United States, at least, a lot of nonprofits are finding it harder and harder to get funding. And recently there's been some limitations to even what tax write-offs they could potentially get, because that's typically the good thing about being a nonprofit.
Or something like that. Yeah.
If you're a 501c3 or 501c4, some of the others too, but not necessarily so much. But typically you could get a tax write-off for donating to them. That's still the case, but it's definitely harder. There was also corporate sponsors. Corporate sponsorships, they typically, they get a lot from sponsoring an event that a nonprofit may run or something like that. But even those are getting harder.
So why is a social enterprise, or thinking of it in terms of a social enterprise, why is that easier than a nonprofit?
So there's two reasons. The chief one is they have since it's a for-profit, they're still doing something good for humanity, but since it's a for-profit, it has a built-in self-sustaining model in it already. There's also less regulation, especially it varies from state to state. You go to Texas or Delaware or Arizona, a few others, there are lots of incentives to create a for-profit business. It doesn't matter if it's what the cause may be. It may be hopefully it's something that's beneficial to humanity in some way.
Yeah.
But there's just so many tax incentives, and that's actually the trend we're seeing more and more. There's actually aside from tax incentives, there's also like out here, I'll give you examples. For instance, Texas, there's opportunities to get a free building for your company out here if you're a for-profit, because they know you're going to bring in revenue for the state.
Okay.
Not so much for
nonprofits.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So yeah.
So then now, so we talked a bit about nonprofits and kind of the challenges involved there, and I guess what you're saying is, regardless, if you are creating a nonprofit, you still need to think of it like a business, and what's going to be your self-sustaining kind of revenue stream. You have to kind of better yet, maybe thinking about a social enterprise might be another way to go. Then the next kind of step is, well, what if you're creating just a normal for-profit limited company, but you are impact focused, right? So like a lot of people who identify as zebra companies, for example. Sure. And what are the kind of tactics that you've seen either social enterprises or charities use in the past that at for-profits that may be mission focused aren't necessarily taking advantage of, but maybe they should check out?
Oh, for sure. There's two primary sources of funding that they should be looking into. One would be grants. Most people, when they think of a grant, they think of it either for education or for a nonprofit.
Yeah, exactly.
And they exist for sure, but
Yeah.
there's more and more grants specifically for profits for startups,
Right.
and almost exclusively for those that have they're impactful in some way, or they just basically help entrepreneurs do something that's socially beneficial
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Second one is sponsorships, where it's actually getting harder and harder for nonprofits to secure corporate sponsorships.
Okay.
However, there is a very brand new emerging market for startups to secure them, and
Well,
there's for
what do you
that.
mean by sponsorships? Like, talk me through. Like, I
Sure.
understand what sponsorships means from a charity point of view, right?
Mhm.
We're doing this program, and Microsoft is going to sponsor this program to help clean up the wetlands, right?
Sure.
So that makes sense as a sponsor for a nonprofit. How does it work though if you're a limited company or like
So,
or you know?
well, yeah. So sponsorships are always on the surface. They're supposed to look charitable, and they are. But the company is always they're strategic about it. They want something in return. Where grantors are looking for just for you to further your mission to help humanity in some way. Corporate sponsors are looking for something that strengthens their brand.
Sure.
So they're looking for publicity. If you're set up in such a way where you can provide them publicity, that's a good exchange for them.
Okay.
If you can provide data, that's something that's very valuable to them, and because they can use that data to either tailor their buyer's market or even expand it. There's also a lot of times it is a sponsorship, but it's closer to a partnership where your product or your service may actually complement them some way, and it actually provides a convenience for them.
Sure.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah, so those are the three chief ways that sponsorships works with from for-profit to for-profit.
So it's a lot more like a commercial partnership.
It is, yeah. It's definitely the money's going one way, and that's the sponsorship side. But the value is they do get something in return,
So
something
like
that expands their brand, which is typical of a
so
sponsorship.
if you have a company and even though you're a for-profit company, especially if you're an early stage company and you have something that may be appropriate for either a corporate social responsibility type
Mm-hmm.
focus, especially if you're impact focused, approaching companies that you might not think would be relevant because you're a for-profit entity and you'd assume that they're just looking at
Correct.
nonprofit, it
Right.
isn't necessarily a no deal.
No,
Or
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. Matter of fact, and don't get me wrong, there's definitely a lot of brand managers who they're like, wait, what? Huh? Yeah. But it's changing more and more,
sure.
and it's definitely becoming the norm. Like when I first started, like I've been a corporate sponsorship broker for about 5 or 6 years now.
Yeah.
Uh, the people I looked up to who've been doing it for decades, they were like, oh no, that's not how it's done. That's changed though, and so it's definitely something where tradition is still there, but it's tradition is starting to have to bow to innovation because
Right.
innovation, as long I mean, at the end of the day, if they make a profit, they get better as a business, and you get funded. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
that's all I care.
Relevant.
Yeah.
When a lot of companies or organizations, for that matter, when thinking about grants, just
Hmm.
on that side,
Hmm.
they they um, they like the idea of them, but when they try and go about finding them and
Yeah.
applying to them, it's insanely
Yeah.
complex sometimes.
Yeah.
Why do you think it is so complicated to apply for grants in general?
Yeah. So grant for one thing, what most people hear, and it's accurate, they hear free money. If you say that, everybody and their mother is going to apply.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
they are grantors are typically bombarded with applications,
Right.
and most of them are really inapplicable. So it's complex out of necessity. That naturally emerges from just the process of elimination. They have to make sure whoever is applying really qualifies and matches their criteria set.
Sure. Sure.
So there's going to be lots of questions, a lot of documentation. The documentation is just to make sure that if they give you this money, you'll actually spend it correctly. And sometimes that doesn't happen. And we've seen it with some of the clients we've represented before, where they won a seven-figure grant and they did not spend it the way they agreed to, and they had to return it. And that's a struggle for everybody involved. So that's the hugest part of the problem right there. So
when you're thinking about companies, and I'm thinking specifically of non-social enterprise, private limited companies, what kind of companies do you think do best when looking towards grants or corporate sponsorships just in general? That's a really broad question. But are there certain types of companies that make for better, higher chance of success?
Yes and no. So there's grants out there for everything you can imagine. There are grants, business grants, by the way, specifically for women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, English-owned businesses, you name it. It's really about what your profile is and matching it to all the grants out there. That's what we do. We're very good at that. So having said that, that's not to say that all demographics and all industries are equal. Emerging markets are always going to have more funding opportunities. There's also, well, in the United States, and this actually is very similar in other countries too, it's just different whatever their needs are, but there's usually more business grants for individuals who come from backgrounds who typically aren't going to inherit a lot of wealth. So say for instance out here, there's a lot of grants for low-income families, for people who come from like rural backgrounds. There's also a lot of I'd say about half the grants are specifically for women, because historically they have not been able to own businesses as easily as men have. And honestly, right now, it's pretty much easier to get a business grant for a woman-owned business than men. So with that in mind, it's a good idea to have a very diverse board. That definitely comes in handy. There's also one of the things they want to look at is to make sure that whatever your industry is, the owners actually reflect it in some regard. So they say, for instance, if you're doing cybersecurity, and okay, that's great, but do you have a background in computer science? Have you ever worked in stuff like that? Some people, they have a great idea. It's very innovative, especially if it's a product or something like that, but they have no background in it whatsoever. That makes funders a little shaky. So and if you don't have that background, you can always partner up with someone does, and that presents a much stronger model. They're also they're looking for stability as well, and a lot of startups, they just don't have that. That's actually where we come in handy, because we do offer a lot of additional services that any startup may need. We either do it directly or indirectly with some of our partners. And those are the things typically that you're looking for. And I'm not going to lie, some of it is luck.
Yeah, exactly. Of course. So, but I guess basically what you're saying is, no, it's not only people who are doing businesses that are solving environmental problems that grants and things like that. And so, your example of cybersecurity and stuff is still relevant. So
pretty much, yeah.
So in terms of Empyrean, your company, like, how would you describe it? And
very carefully.
Very carefully. Yeah. How would you describe it?
Yeah. So we're just some of the background from Empyrean. It actually emerged from our nonprofit. I mean, we pretty much practice what we preach. We had a nonprofit. We realized we needed to make more money. Create a for-profit. We are similar to an incubator, but we're probably more accurately described as back office support. So imagine you're a startup, you have a vision, you have the main goal, but there's all these peripheral things you need. You need money, you need marketing, you need IT or web services. We provide that. The two things we provide directly would be business consulting and fundraising. Fundraising is my department. Business consulting is my partner's department. And we work with a lot of other companies to provide those others. And we can sort of create that team for you to do everything for you so you can focus on what you need to do. So we always say we're the band of merry men to your Robin Hood. That's the best way to sum it up. Yeah. And yeah, and so and of course, you know, we're working with startups a lot and almost exclusively, but along the way, some word got out about us, so we wound up becoming an internal incubator for some well-established companies. Probably the best one known is the Hudson Group right now.
Okay, cool, great. So kind of everything.
Yeah.
Is that hard?
Well, yeah, it is. So again, and originally we were trying to offer all those services ourselves, and that was not going to work. So we focused on, we streamlined and focused on specifically what we're really best at. And no doubt about it, it's fundraising for me and business consulting for my partner. And then we just, thankfully, through Allegiant Trust, the nonprofit that we emerged out of, we were able to find companies that do the other things that we know startups need. And so, it works much much better that way.
Much better. What's the biggest challenge that you see for Empyrean in the next little while? What are the things that you're looking at as a business owner?
So I hate to say this, but yeah, I'm somewhat concerned that right now we're doing something that no other incubator or anything out there is doing. They definitely have investors. They're not even thinking about grants. They don't have like an internal grant writing service. There is some concern that, you know, they'll eventually catch on. So but we're not, I can't get into detail with it, obviously, but we're prepared for that. So that is pretty much the chief concern is making sure that we always stay ahead of the game, because like everything else, there is always that competition. Yeah. There's aside from that, we ran into the typical growing pains. Thankfully we're over those, and it was actually pretty smooth. Everything honestly right now looks very much on the up and up, but we prepared for it. It didn't just, luck did play a part of it, but a big part of it was preparation.
Making your own luck. Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me, Nth.
Oh, my pleasure.
All righty. Take care. Have a great day.
All right. Bye.